Okay, so I wanted to show, we'll go over a few ways of creating animations. Um, Let me see. And can you make Larry the presenter? Can you? Larry wants to be the presenter. I think I'm going to present, Larry. Um, okay, and I've muted everyone, so if you have a question, you can send me a message. Um, so, okay, I think everyone is online now. Um, okay, sorry, I keep seeing people jump on and off. So, okay. So I haven't seen what you presented yet, or what you created for today. I'll review that later. But I'm hoping that you can use some of that information to sort of create um, a basis or a layer on your video, your animation that you create. Um, so I have a few examples of some videos that I'd like to go over with you um, that could be useful. So maybe um, I'll start with this one, which we'll just briefly watch this video, and then we will go into making how to make animations or how to make film edits on Photoshop, Premiere, and After Effects. You can also use other software. You know, like I think Macs come with their own type of video editing software. Um, but and I think I've seen Macs or what do you, not Macs, PCs come with it. And so we'll watch this video, and this isn't necessarily what you're going to create for Friday, but maybe you can create something like this for at the end of the year. Um, so let me see here. Okay. Well, there's music that goes with this, but it's not. I can't hear it for some reason. But we'll just watch a few minutes of this video. This is a competition for Leal in Paris. I show this video every Revit BIM class that I teach. But I think it's a pretty interesting way of how to create an animation like with very crude tools. So all of this is basically stop motion animation, right? They have a map of Paris, then they zoom in to the actual site, zoom in even further. But as you can see, it's just stop motion really. And then they have a projector that they're sort of shooting video of different of the site. And so this part is really amazing because she's just walking in place, but she's She's sort of pretending that she's in this space, which is just a projection on the screen, on the wall behind her. So she goes up the elevator. She's sort of sightseeing. Below means bicycle, so she gets a bike and she's going to go around the site on her bicycle. Again, we're not doing anything like this for Friday, but I'm just trying to show you different ways of using video animation to communicate your design. She's bicycling in reverse there. And then she's a video of biking through the actual site once you leave that area. So that's a really kind of a cool way of describing something. I'll show you one more from the same firm. So here they're basically establishing the program for this building, different ways of organizing it. So now they have this, their proposal. They went from sort of post-it notes to models large enough to stick your camera in there, and then sort of experience the way light comes into different spaces. So pause this. I'll just close it. And I'll show you one more example. This is a video that I made several years ago, 7 years ago, and I was trying to communicate the feeling of a certain quad on the campus. And so I created this video. I think this is the one. Okay, I think I had muted everyone, but I'll try it again. Okay, let's start from the beginning. So again, that is not necessarily what you will be producing for Friday. I just want to get you thinking. I'll show you this other video here at the end, but let's get started with creating some really simple animations here. And I'll start with Photoshop. So most of you have Photoshop. I think everyone's used it. What your screen probably looks like is something like this. And what you'll need to do is go to Window, Timeline, and you click on Timeline. And you see this timeline appears on the bottom of your screen. You may have to increase the size if you want. But what we can do here is sort of create something with different layers. So I'm going to Google, I don't know, old Dallas map. I'm just going to find an image here. This image looks cool. It doesn't look that cool. This one looks kind of interesting, so I'll just save this picture. Come on. Okay. All right. That was with Bing. I'm going to go to Google. Okay, let me save this picture. Okay. What else could be interesting? Here's another section. Okay, so now I'm going to go into Photoshop and I'm going to open those two images, Dallas map and images. Why did they save so poorly? Maybe because I didn't let them load. Let's try again. All right. Okay. So I'm going to open these images. I think it's these two. Yeah. And I'm going to layer these on top of that first file that I made. So here's that first file. I'll name this so that we know what we're doing. I'll name this animation test 1. And this, I'll keep it a Photoshop file. I'm going to duplicate this image, save it onto my Photoshop file there. So it's just going to copy it there. And I'll do the same thing with this other image. Okay. And so I have both images. Maybe we can zoom in here. There's that one. I'll call this one Street Map. I don't know. And maybe I'll zoom in. Imagine you had two maps that were of the same thing, but were perhaps scaled differently. So we have that one and this one. Now, under my timeline, it's if you can see here, it's going to basically make a, how do I explain this? So imagine these layers here in this timeline, just like the layers on Photoshop here, where the image that's on top is what you will see. I don't know why they're turned off, but so the image that you see on top is what you see first. If I turn off that layer, then I see what's going on the layer below. Now we have these purple boxes here that are telling us basically, and this little thing that I keep scrolling, I don't know what this thing is called, but this little marker is going along a timeline. And usually, films and movies traditionally were shot in 30 frames per second or 29.97 frames per second, and that's the frame at which the rate at which your eye doesn't seem to see the transition between two frames. So if you had a frame, if you think of a cartoon or a movie, you have a frame up here, and it's basically a series of stills, right, that are just so fast, they're transitioning so fast that you don't notice that they're basically still images. And traditionally, for a long time, they've been 30 frames per second, but movies now, like hyper-realistic movies, do something like 60 frames per second. It seems unrealistic sometimes when you see those kinds of things. But in Photoshop here, they're following that 30 frame per second. So if we see here, it says 0 frame, this is the beginning of time, 0 frames, 10 frames, 20 frames, and then 1 second is basically 30 frames. So you see that? And if we want to scroll in or out to see this timeline, you just use this tool down here on the bottom that goes back and forth like this, and it just makes it zoom in and out. And they have images of little mountains. So if you go to the left, it makes it smaller. If you go to the right, you're zooming in. Here we have what I was talking about, 30 frames per second. And here, if I scroll back and forth, in this timeline, it's giving me the number of, it's placing it on that timeline. So what I want to do is sort of have the bottom image play for, I don't know, 1 second, and then have the top image play for another second. So if I push play here, it's pretty boring. So what you could do is create your animation for this class, for this next assignment, a series of these elements that are just transitioning between slides like this, one to the other. Maybe it's this is a good example, but maybe you have a drawing that shows a street grid, and then the next layer your buildings will populate, and then another layer, perhaps an overall grid appears like this red grid, and then another few seconds later some other information that you found, perhaps an old historical grid, a preceding grid, or some information about shadows or wind circulation, and those things can just start to appear layer by layer. So in that case, each layer is basically each layer on your timeline here. There is something else you can do, which we're going to try right now, that's called tweening, where it sort of transitions from one slide to the next. Get 30 seconds. Yeah, let me get to the, okay. And to do tweening, what you have to do is select this these three buttons here that you see that says convert to frame. Okay. And then we're going to select both layers here on the left-hand side, like that. And then you're going to select this option down here that looks like 4 or 5 little balls that are sort of have different shades of gray. But if you click there, it's going to ask you how many frames do you want to occur as a transition between slide A and slide B. I'll say 5 frames, and let's see what happens. So now if I push play, it's sort of fading from one next image to the next. And as you can see underneath this timeline here, you can control how many seconds occurs between each one. So I'm going to do 0.2 seconds for all of these. You see what I did there? I sort of selected one, I held shift, and I selected all of them. And then I changed the time frame there to 0.2 seconds. And then if we push play, it should go. Yeah, pretty much. So let me create just an example of what I was thinking, perhaps. I'm going to duplicate this slide here. Move it to the top. I'm just going to cut out the red that I see here. Oops. Because I kind of like this grid that it's showing us. Okay, I'm going to inverse that and delete the rest. So there are my red lines. And I'm going to reset I go back to my other view, and I have to sort of recreate what I want to occur. So what I want to occur is that this lower drawing happens for, let's see, 1 second. And then the one above that occurs for another second. Okay. And then the one above that maintains those red lines. But I want to tween between these two because I want those red lines to slowly fade in after this occurs like that. So I'll select those two. I'll go back to this window here. Okay. And I'll hit tween. 5 is good. And I think that's what I want to happen with it. Okay, that's not very good looking. Let's try this again. I want this to tween as well. I don't want this to just go fade into. So that tweening is occurring between those two, but there's no tweening between these two. There we go. Now let's go back and see if this plays what I want it to play. There we go. That's kind of boring, but that's what I wanted to see. So if I play this forever, and for this weekend, for the end of this assignment, this is basically what I want to see. A lot more information. These are just grids and maps layered on top of each other, but I know you guys can be more creative. So once we do this, how do we get it out of here? Like into a format that we can play. Let me save this first in case this crashes. We can go to File, Export, and we can select Export As. So File, Export, Export As. And here I can select how I want to export this thing. I think a GIF would do fine. So let's just export this and see what happens. It's going to ask me where. I'll call it animation test 1. And it's exporting. It's just exported a still image. Let's try it again. There's another way, but I think you should be able to export it this way. Export as. It just wants to export it as a still image. Oh. So let's do it the other way, that I know will work. Go to File, Export, and select Render Video. And here you can give it a name, and you can also give it a format. H.264 works really very well, so it comes out as an MP4. You can change the quality, you can change the document size, you can give it more frames per rate or less, depending on how big the file is going to be. So anyway, I gave it a name. It selects folder right here, and you just basically tell it where you want it to save, and then you hit render. It's thinking, it's thinking. Okay. Let's see. Here it is. Windows Media Player, sure. So there's our animation. Pretty fast. Let's loop this thing. Okay. Now let's export it as another thing. File, export, render to video. And instead of an H.264, let's do QuickTime. QuickTime usually comes out enormous, but sometimes you never know, sometimes it works better. Okay. It should be. See what I was saying? It came out to be 2.24 gigs. I don't think it'll even play. It's playing, but it's just way too. It's 2.24 gigs. So I'm going to delete that, and H.264 is the way to go. Okay. another thing, if you wanted to let's start a new project. Okay. I'm going to make a circle. Maybe I'll just make a bar. I'm placing it on this layer here. Okay. And I'm going to copy that layer down. I'll start out kind of close. Come on. And then I'll get gradually further apart. Sure. So I'm going to see if I can create an animation where this line is sort of moving all the way down. So I'm just going to hit Window, Timeline, and then I'm going to select Create Video Timeline. And here are all my layers. So I think 10 frames would be good for this, for each slide. What's that? Let's zoom into better. So it should be 10, 20, 1, 10. Keep going with the 10. 10. And make all of these end at 3. Sure. Okay. But I do want them to end. I don't want them to overlap. I'll just go like that. So if I make this smaller, there you have my line sort of moving this way. And if I want to push play, we'll see how fast that goes. Pretty slow. But let's add some tweens under there. And select all of them. I'm going to click on this 3 little thing here. I'll hit tween. Sure, I'll say 5 between each frame. And then I'm going to select all the frames and give them a 0.1 time frame. So let's see what happens. It didn't work. Let's try this again. Turn all of these on. Maybe I have to select all of these like this. Tween. Okay, the tweening didn't work. I don't know what that's about, but if I hit play, I can have this thing sort of moving down the screen. I want to make it go faster. Let's see what 0.1 second looks like. maybe this is a way of animating, grids across your screen, perhaps, or the way something is, something's moving. Like if I grab this screen here, this element, and I move it that way, it's going to appear like it moves that way. Like it's moving. So the more slides you create, the smoother the transition will be. But you don't necessarily have to create a slide for each frame, because again, 30 slides for a non-calculator. So in 1 minute there's 60 seconds. So times 30, that means you would need 1,800 slides per minute. Does that make sense? 300, no. 1 frame per second, and you have 60 seconds. 30 frames per second. So in 1 minute, you need 1,800 to create a smooth transition. So that's not necessary. For our purposes, something sort of jagged like that, crude like that would work. Okay, now let's do some other stuff. Let's go to Premiere. Oh, it's open. So let me see, file, new. Maybe I should start it from the beginning so you guys can see what it looks like. Yeah. I'm going to close this Photoshop file just to conserve RAM. Oh, there's a lecture at 4. Right. I think everyone should go to that. So let me show you briefly. Let me show you how to just do some quick things here in the next 13 minutes, and then you guys should go to the lecture. So I open Premiere. I'm going to select New Project. I'll give this a name, Animation Fall Studio. I'll choose a location to save it. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Okay. So now what you do in Premiere is very similar to Photoshop in certain ways. So first, what we want to do is import the images that we're going to use. So I'll go to Import. Actually, first let's set up the sequence. We'll go to File, New, Sequence, and here we're going to tell it what format we want this video to be in. Right now it says TV and TSC standard 48. Let's go to widescreen so we have a HD TV 16:9 ratio like this. Okay, so we'll select that. Okay, now this looks better. So I went to File, New, Sequence, and I selected that one. Now I'm going to import my files, those maps that I just downloaded. File, Import. Okay, I think it was this one and this one. So I've imported those files, and down here is a timeline, not dissimilar to the one in Photoshop. And what we have are different layers. So these that you have here above this double line, 1, 2, 3, are the visual layers, and the ones below that are the audio layers. So if you wanted to add sound and edit sound, that's how you would do it. So I'm going to drag in onto this timeline here. I'm going to drag in this old map, and I'm going to just drag it in and place it here. So there's the map in my, this is sort of a preview here on the right-hand side. And there's lots of things I can do with this image. For example, if I use the scroll bar down here, I can zoom in and out. But if I double click on this, or if I right click on this, I should say, well, no, I don't want to do that yet. If I select this image that I just pulled in, I can stretch this out and make it smaller. So I can tell it how many seconds I want it to last. I can also right click on it and go to speed and duration, and I can give it a length here. So 1 second, 3 seconds, whatever. And remember, 30 frames is a second. So that's why when you see the numbers go from 29 to 1 second. So it goes 24, 25, 26, 30, 1 second. So I'll select OK, sure. I'll drag my other image on. I can place it on the same bar, or I can place it above it, or above, or keep going. But for our purposes, let's place it on the V2 line. And the same thing there. I'm going to change the speed duration. Right click, speed duration. I'll change this to 1 second, maybe 2 seconds. Yeah, let's do this 2 seconds. And this one underneath, I'm going to also go back to it. Right click on it. Come on. Speed duration, 2 seconds. So it's going to extend to that distance there. Okay, oops. What I want to do, sure. What I want to do is change the shape of this map here. You see how I have some black on the ends there? So if I select this image and I go to Effect Controls here, there's a lot of options that I can use to sort of change things here. If I make this motion button larger, there's options that I can choose there. So I can make the scale bigger by scrolling this up or down, and it'll make the image larger or smaller. I can change the position of this thing in that direction or the other direction. I can also rotate it if I wanted to do that. And so what I did here is I changed this from 100 to 117 because I was just scaling it up to do something like that. Okay, so that's good. Now let's go to the second image. I'm going to move the timeline bar here. And I'm going to select that image and select Effect Controls. And here what I want to do is make this image fade in. And in order to do that, we have to sort of create what we call keyframes. And keyframes basically say, at this point in time, I want you to have these attributes. By the time you get to this point, I want you to have another set of attributes. So what I'm saying is, like, let's zoom in here to 1 second, and I have this option selected there, the second color, Effect Controls, and I'm going to go to Opacity. And right now it's saying the opacity is 100%. If I go to 0, let's go to the left and go to 0, the opacity is 0. which makes sense. Now, do that again. So I'm at 1 second there, and what I want to do is click on this little button here, which is adding or removing a keyframe. So I'm going to click there, and a little keyframe, it's a half a triangle there, appears at the beginning of the lifetime of this image. And if I scroll to, let's say, 2 seconds here, and I click again on this keyframe, now I have these 2 points in time where it's remembering that I want it to have a certain attribute. So at the beginning of this frame, I want this image to be 0, opaque. And by the time we get to 2, I want it to be fully opaque. So at this point in time, I have this here, it's at 0. And once I start to scroll to that other moment in time, it becomes opaque. You guys see that? So if I push play, let's go from the beginning. And it's a lot smoother than Photoshop, as you can see. Happens a lot smoother. Something else you can do that's kind of cheesy, but let's do it, why not? Is the same way that you control that opacity there, you can control motion, as I showed earlier, with keyframes. So I'm going to go here to this opacity. Just make it a little bit so I can see it like that. Okay, so I click here. I'm going to go to position. And I'm going to move this map. Let's move it. I want to move it off like that, maybe over here. And I'm going to hit this little toggle here to keep track of it. And then I hit that, and it has a keyframe now. And now I'm going to go to 2 seconds. And I'm going to bring this thing back on top of the image. Now what you'll see, it's kind of poorly edited, but you see the image sort of come in, and it also is becoming, excuse me, it's becoming more opaque or less transparent as it gets to that point. So at this moment in time point, at 1 second, our position is out of frame, so that's recorded there. And when I get to 2 seconds, the position's there. Again, at this moment in time at 1, the opacity is 0, and when I get to 2, the opacity becomes 100. Now let's export this, and then we'll be done for today. I'm recording this so I can share this to you once it uploads, but we may need to do some more because there are other things that you can do that are pretty interesting. But let's export this. So one of the ways you can do it is to go to File, Export, Media. I'm just going to think for a second. File, Export. Come on. There we go. Media. And here we're going to change this to H.264, the format, H.264, which compresses it. And to give it a name, you select Output Name, and you click Sequence. See how this is blue here? And then you find a location that you want to save it. So this will be Animation Test 2. And then you hit Export. Well, let's see what this thing looks like. Not bad. This is kind of really bad, but that is how you create a simple animation and editing. So I'll send you this third video that I wanted you to see. Um, but guys, this is an advanced studio in grad school, so um, you know, don't just use it as inspiration. But we're gonna get close, but we have a lot of other things we're focusing on. In this studio that you're seeing here, um, this was the studio was the final product was a video. They had no models or drawings or anything, and this was a chapel in New York City. But I'll share this video with you, and you guys can share it or can view it and ask questions. So for Wednesday, I'd like to see storyboards. If you guys don't know what a storyboard is, it's just a way of outlining the way that you want your animation to occur. Nice. So you may have seen it like for movies or things where they sort of show the way that something is going to occur, the actions in a sequence. But it's also useful. It's almost like creating an outline for yourself um, when you're laying out your boards. But I'd like to see storyboards and any animation drafts you have. Let's start exploring um, and ask me questions about different editing things or why are you, or maybe you want to do something and you want me to explain or explore with you how to create that. So storyboards and animation drafts for Wednesday, and please upload your assignment for today to Blackboard. I've created a location, and I'll be reviewing that in later this evening. So that's it. Thank you, everyone.